So I thought to myself, well, I am going to be a professional voiceover artist and change the industry. I'm going to be available 24/7. I'm going to be able to write my own scripts. I'm going to be able to do my own productions. I'm going to be able to do 360 voice acting, voiceover production 360. And well, fast forward, that's what caught on. And that's just how I had my edge in the market. And that's how I was able to influence the Ghanaian market. So after a while, it began to catch on.
Hi, and welcome to the Everything Voiceovers podcast. I'm Tcode, an African voiceover talent from Nigeria, and this is my podcast where I take on voiceover topics from an African perspective. In this episode, my guest is Mawuli Sachey, a top voiceover artist from Ghana. Mawuli opens me up to the world of voiceover in his country and how he has been able to make a significant impact in the growth of the craft. Sit back and enjoy this episode. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Everything Voiceovers podcast, The African Perspective. It's another season actually, and this is the first interview episode of the season 2 of the podcast. I'm super duper excited. My name is Tcode and I am your host. I'm a Nigerian voice actor, and this is always something I love to do, to interview voice actors across the continent of Africa, because we are trying to look at voiceovers from the African perspective. Now, today, I'm excited to bring someone on the show who isn't a Nigerian. I've got emails from Africans across board telling me how the podcast has inspired them and, they learn one or two things. And I said, yes, we're going out of the shores of Nigeria. And today we're going to another country. We kind of have similarities and we throw a lot of banters. We're like brothers and siblings actually that fight all the time. But we are good siblings in the continent. So if you're guessing right, I'm talking about Ghana. We're going to Ghana today, and I've got an amazing voice talent from Ghana. He's someone whom I listen to his voiceovers and I'm just like, wow. This voice is amazing, but it's not enough for you to just have a good voice. Knowing how to use your voice is what makes you stand out as a voice actor. And this is someone who stands out pretty well as a voice actor in the country of Ghana. And you can tell from his years of experience, but I'm not going to talk too much about him. I also want to know more about him. I want to know how his journey started. So I'm going to introduce him with what's the word now? I'll just say nickname, right? We were having a conversation this morning and he said something about being the Lagbaja of the Ghanaian voiceover industry. For context, Lagbaja is a Nigerian music icon who is very known for wearing a mask or, dressing up like he's a masquerade of some sort. So you don't really know the guy behind the mask. So today I have with me a voiceover artist par excellence, someone whom I respect so much from the country of Ghana. Has been doing this for decades and is just absolutely phenomenal, a professional, a classy one by that, who is usually, you all know him from the outside as the voice printer. Enough of the talking from my end. It's a pleasure to meet you. I want you to do the introduction yourself. I know your name, but a lot of people don't know who you are. So what's your name?
Thank you, Tolan. Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. Well, let me also thank the audience for joining us and listening in. That's really great. I love it. Now, my name is Mawuli Sachey. I do a lot of things, but I'm mostly known for being a voice artist. I've been doing this for quite some time now. I like to conservatively say that I've done it for 15 years, but I know I've done that for much longer than that. As I said before, I do other things which are also relevant to the industry, but I'll limit myself to being a voice actor. Is that okay for you, Tolan? Would you like me to say a bit more?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, Mawuli. It's nice to have you again.
And it's impressive to know that you've been in this industry for that long and you're still doing this and you're doing it well. Let me start with the anonymity. You try to stay conservative, which is something, it's a preference, but I'm very curious to know why you've been, behind the scene all this while. Yeah.
Well, I suppose everybody likes to promote themselves in a certain way. For me, this is my, how shall I say, modus operandi. It is my brand identity. It is something that I dreamed of, and I thought that I should sell my voice, and my voice should project my personality. And, my physical features should not detract from what I'm selling to the public. I think the main reason why I chose, to project myself this way. So it was deliberate. I could do everything that everybody else is doing and be out there in the public space, for people to see me and all that. But I prefer to be anonymous, and that has sold the brand pretty well. It's done the job that I wanted it to do for me.
Great answer. And there's something to learn from this, actually. We're in a world where everybody wants to put themselves out there because they know that that's how clients are going to find them in most cases. And that helps their brand, that helps their business. But you are not in the conventional pattern of doing things in this regard of marketing. So I'm quite curious to understand how you're able to make get connected with your clients, and you're still making money off voiceovers even though you're staying anonymous. What's the secret of that strategy? How does that work?
Well, people have asked me this question over and over again. I think what you've got to understand is you have to identify what exactly you're selling. What do you sell? I'm selling my voice. That's what it is. I'm projecting a voice. I'm projecting an identity that is associated with my voice, not me as a person. Now, once you've identified that, then you understand that you're also dealing with a certain, market. What does the market want? I know you're going to ask some questions, but let me chip in here. The thing is that I'm looking at a certain market which requires something of me. Am I able to provide it? And does anonymity come as a form of added value to what I'm doing? Does it add value to myself? And then adding value to myself, does it also add value to what the client is asking me to do for them? To a large extent, from my point of view, yes. The client does not necessarily have to see or know you. All they're looking for is a certain level of quality. Do you deliver that? Does that sell their product or service? Does it do for them what they've asked you to do for them and pay for? For me, that's all that matters. And it's worked perfectly over the years. I'm sure you're going to ask follow-up questions and I'm going to go into detail. But for me, yes. So I really don't want to put the cart before the horse here. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay.
So the most important thing is quality. You could see me. Totally, you could see me and say, oh, this guy looks really good. Or he's the ugliest guy on the face of earth. But how does that, dovetail into the quality expectation of a client? We're all looking for a certain level of quality that will do the job that we're asking you to do for us. Does that take away from it? Does that add to it? That should be the primary, motive or the primary, requirement here in this situation. So my not being there does not really make much of a difference. Am I delivering the quality that the clients want? And that's it. That's what's kept it going.
Interesting. Quality over every other thing. And I think that strategy works. At the end of the day, the job is what matters. It's not the looks. It's not the branding per se. The branding brings the clients, but the job is what keeps them coming. A great lesson I've learned from you already. Let's talk about how you started. One of the things you just said is when you were about to start this, you thought about it. Being anonymous is the brand strategy you want to use, which is cool, right? But when you started, what was it like? I know in Africa, voiceover is something that is not as big as it is in the West. Nonetheless, it has been existing for decades. And it's in this era that we have lots of young people populating the industry, as it were. 15 years ago, I'm not sure what it would have looked like then in Ghana. So what inspired someone like you to take voiceover as a craft? You projected to the future and you said, this is how I want it to be. Did you have prior knowledge about voiceovers? Is it something you stumbled in? Like a lot of people get into voiceovers via the broadcast industry. What's your own backstory like? How did you get into the voiceover industry in Ghana?
Well, that's very interesting, Tony. I never really thought about it. It wasn't a plan. I really didn't think I was going to be a voice actor. But the other thing is, for as long as I can remember, as a child, I was doing impressions of cartoon characters. It didn't ever occur to me that there would be a split foundation, going into doing, voice acting. But it helped a lot because, voicing wasn't anything strange. It wasn't a strange thing to me. But then at a certain point, I realized that people were commenting on my voice and, complimenting me on it. It still didn't make sense to me because I didn't quite understand what they were talking about. Then one day, a cousin of mine who was running a studio, a recording studio, asked me to come over. So I was there with him when a script came to be read, and the usual guy who was supposed to be there didn't come. Well, he did come after a while, but he was late. So incidentally, I was the one who scripted, the voice. I put the whole script together. And he said, well, if you're here, you've done this, why don't you just go ahead and read it? Let's see how it goes. And I did. Again, this was not something strange for me. It's something I'd been doing a lot, back in the day. I just hadn't thought about it in the context of voicing. So I just went ahead and did it, in the most animated form that I could possibly have put it. And he said, well, this is it. I said, this is what? He said, you've just done it. I said, well, that's great then. So not long after the guy came in, the pro came in, saw what I'd been written and heard what I'd done. And you're like, well, then you guys don't really need me, man. This guy's probably just killed the whole thing. Just let it fly. I said, no, listen. You are the man. The client said you should read this for them, so go ahead and do it. And that was the turning point. That just was the turning point. Now, you asked the question. Let me answer that question. After a while, I figured that, look, most people who did voiceovers in Ghana are amateurs. They're just part-timers. They do this for fun. And maybe the quick side gig effects that it brings to the, finances. But I don't like doing things that way. It's either you dive in or you're not in at all. So I figured out a way of making this work. I realized a couple of things. I realized that most of these guys are amateurs and they have to come to the studio on weekends or after close of work. So I thought to myself, well, I'm going to be a professional voiceover artist and change the industry. So I'm going to be available 24/7. I'm going to be able to write my own scripts. I'm going to be able to do my own productions. I'm going to be able to do 360 voice acting, voiceover production 360. And well, fast forward, that's what caught on. And that's just how I had my edge in the market. And that's how I was able to influence the Ghanaian market. So after a while, it began to catch on. Basically, this is how I began. And this is the strategy I used to, capture my end of the market.
This sounds very audacious to me. You you said something about influencing the Ghanaian market, and you also said something about how things were done back then, where people probably just amateurs and did it for the fun of it, or as a side hustle, stuff like that. Uh, no, you kind of would say stumbled into this, like many other people did as well, and you discovered your talent, or you discovered that you could do it well. I'm looking at two things now that I want to know. Why did you make that audacious move? Like, what was happening in your life at the time that you thought you could leave all of that and do voiceovers 360? Because for many people that get into the voiceover industry, there's a progression of they're probably doing something else that was making money, and they started doing voiceovers gradually. And after a while, they transition from whatever it was they were doing to sitting down with voiceovers full time. Because it's not as though you expect to start getting all the clients and making all the money that pays your bills almost immediately. So I feel like something must have inspired you to do this. If I am correct, would you like to tell me what made you make that paradigm shift in your life, as it were?
Well, I started by talking about that first study experience. Now, between that time and the day that I made that decision, I'd been doing a lot of pro bono work, and it was deliberate.
Mm.
No, it was deliberate. I already had a vision that this is where I was headed. So what I was doing was actually building my craft, building experience and putting in the work to be able to set a proper foundation, and reaching out to people. So I was pretty much known around all the recording houses, and all the agencies knew who I was. To a large extent, they knew who I was. I just hadn't stepped it up back then yet, but I'd done the groundwork by doing a lot of pro bono. I can tell you that there's still people who owe me till today, 15 years, 20 years later, they haven't paid.
Wow.
But that was something that was to be expected, because I knew that was, the beaten path, and the cross that I had to bear to get where I wanted to get to. Yes, I had things going for me. And then after a while, I went back to school and I told myself, listen, you've got a bunch of talents here you've got to give you these talents to play with. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to prove everybody wrong. And I like challenges like that, and I like to stand out. So I said, listen, you're going to prove everybody wrong. You're not going to come back from school and go back to your old job. You're not going to come back from school and go looking for a job. Besides, I've never been the 9-to-5 type. I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. It hasn't worked with my lifestyle. So I said, okay, you don't have a choice. You're going to have to make this work. So I actually drafted a plan, and the plan was, you are going to be the first professional voiceover artist Ghana will see, and you will change the industry. And it happened. It happened.
Wow.
Because I was available 24/7. People wanted to have me, and people didn't have the time. The agencies didn't have the time to wait for weekends or close of day to have people coming in to record. It didn't happen overnight. But after a while, I knew it was going to happen. People were going to catch on, and they did. So after a while, I became the preferred voice, for doing stuff. So that's how it happened. I've answered the question, fully. Was there anything?
Yeah, you have. You have. Again, I must say, that's such a bold move. And that's a big vision. And I am glad that I'm talking to you today, because you're the guy that decided to make a difference, to do things differently, to change the industry. And you're still very much present and active in the industry. So let's talk about the industry. Let's talk about the practice that was in vogue at the time. How jobs used to come from the clients to the voice talents. You've been mentioning agencies So what was the should I use the word life circle or the process like? How did the works come? And also what was the value that was placed on voiceovers at the time before we move into present day Ghana or Ghanaian voiceover industry?
Well, as much as I can remember, I recall that, as I said before, I mean, this was, generally an amateur's world. So if clients wanted things done, they'd go through the agencies. The agencies will contact the recording houses, or it could be the other way around. The recording houses have a deal and they call an amateur to come over and do the job in their spare time or whenever they're able to do it. So it was largely an informal, how shall I say it, market, really, where it was who knew who, and who was in touch with whom, and how well one person knew the other. And that's how these jobs were passed around. So you didn't have a really formal environment, when things were done a certain way in a structured manner. It really wasn't like that. So it was whom you knew and what they wanted at that point and what you were capable of doing. That's how the jobs kept being passed around. It didn't matter if you... But then again, I should say this. There's the state broadcaster, the GBC, the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, who have a structured, training program that takes care of voices, but not for voice acting purposes, but purely for the radio industry, the radio and TV industry, So many of the guys who came to do the work came from this structured industry, which is state sponsored. It was a little bit later than other amateurs because of perhaps their good voices, but no particular training in the industry, would come in and do the work and so on and so forth. But it followed the same pattern. You'd have people come in because of recommendations from one agency or from one recording house because they dealt with them in the past and they thought they could do one job or another and so on and so forth. But it was pretty much unstructured. There really wasn't any structure to it, So basically that's how it worked. Yeah.
So it's safe to say you didn't pass through any form of training. You learned this maybe on the job and you grew with the experience coming with it.
Well, that's very interesting that you point that out. And people find it really, really strange that I tell them that I had no formal training, not from GBC, not from anybody. I did this myself. I was passionate about this. I knew I could do it. I mean, there was loads of information online to go look at. So most of the stuff that I learned, and every day, here's another thing. On a daily basis, every time till today, even now, every time I go into the studio to do something, maybe a few minutes later, it may not sound as good as I thought it was when I did record it. So there's this constant, there's a constant, how do you call it, deliberate attempt to get better, to always do it a little better, and to calibrate, the quality level of what you're doing every time you go into the booth or every time that you have the opportunity to record something. You want to make it better. So basically, that has been my philosophy. Incrementally make things better. What were we talking about again? I've lost my train of thought. Forgive me.
I just wanted to know your background, if you had a learning opportunity or you did it yourself.
Yes. So basically, I've on the back of pure passion, just the sheer passion of doing this. And here's the thing. I said that I didn't have the benefit of doing any more 9-to-5s. So it was a do or die affair here now, if you're if this is what you're going to live by, this is what's going to, sustain you for the rest of your life, then you might as well do it properly and make it work so you can make ends meet and not just survive, but live properly. So I did everything possible, to find all the best resources that would make me not a Ghanaian voice. This is something I need to point out. I did not set out, this is one of the things I forgot to tell you. I did not set out to be a Ghanaian voice. Nope. I wanted to be a voice actor that could pretty much play in any environment in any geographical jurisdiction. That was the vision, that was the goal, and I pretty much attained that. So the vision was really big, and for you to be able to attain that vision, it came along with a lot of responsibility, and I did what needed to be done. But most of the stuff that I've done so far, I've learned myself, purely on the back of passion. So hopefully I've answered the question.
You have really. How you were able to learn this on your own and you made it your thing. One of the things I'm curious to know again is, because it seemed like you took a solitary journey. There were not people like you at the time that you started doing all of this. The value that was given to voiceovers at the time, this is something that even till today we experience either in Nigeria or in some other African countries like Kenya, or even, internationally with the rise of pay-to-play sites and all, or sites like Fiverr for freelancers, where voice actors are paid little for what they do. I'm sure you had your challenges in terms of remuneration, because if you say you're in an industry that wasn't structured, what was it like determining how much you were worth at the time? Was there an average pay for voice actors? And was it something you thought this was worth it, or it was really, really below the belt and you needed to fight for a better pay? And if you did, how were you able to say this is what the standard should be? Because I'm sure that to a large extent, your involvement, especially in this issue of money, must have influenced the industry at large. So tell me how you were able to navigate that path of putting value to what you did and also affecting the industry in general.
Great question. So you have to understand that one of the main reasons that got me into doing things the way I did it and implementing the vision was this thing that, I recognized that it was an amateur's market. So I recognized that this was an amateur's market and it wasn't paying much. It wasn't as viable as I would have wanted it to be. It didn't make sense to me, which is the reason why I started the way that I did. Make sure that I'd gone through the whole, 9 yards and figured out how things worked, and decided that I'll single-handedly, create a benchmark. Now, in order for you to create such a benchmark, you needed to infuse all these other variables, which were not available, which were not there in the beginning. You understand? So one of the main things that I wanted to put out there was Nestle. Here's a guy who's available all the time. You can reach him when you want. He's very professional. He knows what he's about. If you come along with a script, he'll review your script and make it even more professional. He'll advise on what to do to make it better, and so on and so forth. He'll do the production for you. His turnaround time is superb, and so on and so forth. So just beyond coming to the studio after 5 and recording, or weekends to record, I made the conscious effort to make it a worthwhile industry, that would be attractive to the client, so that their job is just to ask me to do something for them and they go to sleep and they get like a wonderful, output that would be very close to what they were dreaming of when they asked me to do a job for them. So pretty much take the hustle out of our clients' hands and do it. And do it with such precision and with such quality that they're willing to pay what you're asking them, even though they're not used to that. It was not easy in the beginning, but of course I knew, I'd seen it happen, so I knew. But I also knew that after a while it was going to happen. It was only a natural progression. People were going to come around to the idea and say, wow, this is different. This guy is on another level. Not everyone liked it when the change began, to roll. They didn't quite like that because they were more interested in the way things were done in the past, and that benefited them financially and so on and so forth. But I knew it didn't have to be like that, and I also knew that it was an interest of the agencies, the general industry, to have certain qualities as benchmarks, So for me, it was an incremental thing that was going on. I knew I couldn't do it alone, but I knew I could put the whole thing into motion, and people will come around to it. So basically, that's how it happened. First of all, it was an amateur's market, but we threw in certain variables that added value. Value that was noticeable, that you couldn't avoid. And after a while, the industry caught on, and that became the standard. So you'd find other people were trying to sound like me. That was very flattering, and now that's standard. Yes. Basically, that's right. So I could go out there and ask for a certain level. I could go out there and ask for a certain range of, payment, and I'd get it, which is unheard of. Well, you didn't have a choice. You're going to have to pay because you're looking at all the variables that are coming into, the work and the output that you were getting. And you didn't have a choice. You had to pay, and this forced the industry and everybody else who was getting on board to have to raise the bar for themselves, So basically that's how it went.
Wow. I have a lot of things in my mind right now. I was listening to talk about my first introduction to a Ghanaian-based talent, a lady. I met her via Instagram, and the quality of her work was so impeccable. And then when I met her, it was also very good. And then, even though I don't know the Ghanaian voiceover industry, meeting the both of you gave me an impression of the standard and how you guys do voiceovers in Ghana. Even though sometimes when I listen to the voiceovers, it doesn't really sound like the African accents that you'd expect. But now I get it when you say you didn't want to be the typical Ghanaian voice talent. You wanted to be a global voice actor. So I'm also curious to understand how this a lot of questions on my mind. I still want to talk about the industry as much as possible, but let's just, flow. Let's talk about accent a little bit. Let's talk about identity a little bit and how you're able to place a balance to that. Sometimes when I hear you, you don't sound African. And the other voice talents that I know also many times don't sound African. We may say, oh, there's the influence of Mawuli in the industry that kind of caught up and everybody's trying to become like you. Is that the case, or is it the case where if you want the typical Ghanaian accent, you get it, and people will do that typical Ghanaian English accent, are respected for who they are? Or is it a situation where people just want that polished Western, American or British kind of sounding accent, and they ignore those who do the typical Ghanaian accent? Because this is very important. I've come to learn that there's something about our indigenous accent that makes us unique and stand out. It's fine for anybody who wants to do that, and it's fine for anybody who wants to do the the general one, the very polished English. But
I want to understand how that has affected the industry as well. What do you have to say to all of this? Because it's a lot of thoughts in one place.
I agree with you completely, Tolu. I understand where you're coming from. Again, when I began this thing, I told myself that I wanted to be a global voice. You know, it wasn't so much a Ghanaian voice as more of something that could be related to anywhere it is that I was operating in. But I did not forget. I did not forget the local industry and local expectations. To be sure, I had issues with my, how do you call it, with the industry as far as the local delivery was concerned. Now the thing is, personally, I was angling for multinational clients. And I was looking to do the polished thing, the polished accent and so on and so forth. But it occurred to me at a certain point that you're not going to go on that tangent alone. And even though you want to create a certain niche for yourself. So that's the whole thing. For me, I wanted to create an English niche where I could pretty much get into any environment as long as it was, multinational, it was corporate and so on and so forth. That was the niche I was creating, principally. But I also understood after a while that you needed to cater for the Ghanaian market, and its idiosyncrasies. So this is a good question. Nobody's been left out. I have just created a certain benchmark for myself and for my aspect or my angle of the industry. You'd be surprised. I've done things in the local languages. I've done the Ghanaian accent. If you asked me to do it, if you called upon me to do it, I would do it. It's not a problem at all. Personally, I just angled from the very beginning, knowing, I think it was more of a, a matter of economics, really. It was a matter of economics. I'll tell you what happens. Now, the local radio stations pretty much, had cornered that market, where they did the local languages, and that market was already taken over. I was not going to go over there and compete with those people. So it made more economic sense, and business sense to be able to find a niche for myself. And I found it in that one for me perfectly. So everybody's actually catered for in the market, there's nobody's left behind and so on and so forth. People have found a way of creating niches for themselves. And the local market has its own niche and they're thriving. Matter of fact, I believe they're making more money than I am, per capita. So I don't think anybody's left out. But if you called upon me to do something for you in a certain niche environment, well, as long as the money is good and it works for me and is within my, economic
rate
spectrum, yes, and range of spectrum, I'll do it. But that's not my primary focus. No. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely.
Really.
And
everybody's thriving. It's a very democratic society. It's a democratic industry. Everybody's doing well, believe me. Just as the I don't think there's much difference between the Nigerian and the Ghanaian context. Really, we have a lot of things in common. I mean, I followed you guys a lot. I know what's going on generally in Nigeria. So it's not very different. The only problem is that we need a lot of structure. Forgive me for jutting into that aspect. I know we're coming there, but I'll just do a little preview on that.
Yeah, great. Good.
We need a little bit of structure. Not a little bit. We need some structure. But that structure is not going to come from legislation. That's not our primary point of call. It's going to have to come from the artists themselves to create the structure for themselves. That will require a certain level of cohesion, a certain level of collectivity, and not just, doing things individually and trying to beat a lonely path. No, that's not going to work. So let me leave it at that for now. I'm sure we're going to get into that a little later.
As a matter of fact, I'd like us to go into that. But just before we talk about it, I just want to make a comment. I'm very happy to know that in the Ghanaian space, in the Ghanaian voiceover space, people are confident to do what they love to do in terms of the accents that they can project as voice talents. Sometimes I meet young talents who think they need to have a certain type of accent to be accepted as voice talents. And I try as much as I can to help them to understand that as long as they can speak eloquently, they can enunciate properly, they have the basic requirements. To talk about accent is to talk about understanding what the brand is all about and the people the brands are trying to reach. So that determines the kind of accent for which job that you're doing. So letting them understand that even if you're doing something in the Nigerian context now, if you're doing something in a Igbo accent or heavily accented by the Igbo language, right? You still will be able to do what you do because there is a demography that relates with that kind of voiceover. But like when you mention the economic factors, it also makes a lot of sense because certain types of accents may not get the kind of demand that some types will get. So yeah, one just has to think about it well, think the business side of it, but at the end of the day, be confident about what you have and don't feel intimidated by someone else's accent because it sounds a certain type of way. I just needed to put that out there for people who still think that they need to master a type of accent. If you have it naturally, if you've been able to learn it, that's great. And I'm not against people learning different accents because it also opens you up to more opportunities, just like Mawuli here. So it's a win-win at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the industry.
Before you go on, just before
please do
this quickly. Again, I mean, listen, I came into this thinking purely from a business point of view. You know, yes, artistic was extremely important. So I learned a lot about that. And I'm trying to improve myself. The most important reason you're doing this is because you want it to make you some money after a while.
Sure.
You know, after you've paid your dues, you know, doing what needs to be done to grow yourself. At the end of the bottom line is money. So will this make me enough money to cater for my needs and make me live a respectable life? So you need to look at a situation where you cultivate your versatility if you have the capacity to do that. And for me, my niche was, you know, the corporate world, you know, the polished accent, but I also was versatile enough to develop other, you know, subgroupings of this niche market. So I wasn't just doing corporate, but I was doing corporate, you know, presentations, corporate, other fields. I could do pretty much everything, you know, as far as polished accent is concerned. You know what I'm capable of doing, Tolu. So there's no need to, you know, belabor the whole. Exactly.
Yeah. I went through your website.
Yes. Developing a certain level of versatility works. It doesn't matter in which area you're operating. So it's absolutely important to also build a certain level of versatility. So you can touch base with a number of demographics in order for you to be able to, you know, stay properly afloat and do your job, you know, and relate to people professionally. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to be caught up in one specific, you know, area. Develop versatility is extremely important.
I agree with you. And thank you for putting some balance to that topic of accent and business, right? Because we have to consider both side by side. Now let's talk about the industry. Some minutes ago, you were talking about certain changes that were introduced or became a thing, and some people weren't comfortable with it, but they had to adjust. And when you talk about changes, it means there is a development. The industry is growing. Now, the industry is not where we want it to be right now, but certain things have improved with time. thanks to you and some stakeholders who must have been doing the right things. Do you mind sharing some of this structural, permit me to use that word, because the moment something becomes the norm, we can say, oh, it's now more like the structure of things, even though it's an unofficial structure. So what were the changes that someone like you and some others probably introduced, the standards you brought to the industry? Standard was the word I was looking for, not structure, by the way. So what were those changes that you would look back 15 years ago and you look at 2023 and you're like, I'm glad this is how we do things now? Tell us about them.
Okay. I think mostly what has actually changed the industry is technology. I'm not doing the same things I used to do 10 years ago. No. I recall that in the past, well, I'll still be called into the studio, if I had to come to for example, if I had a script, first of all, I'll ask you to send me the script. There's no way you're going to ask me to do work and I wouldn't know exactly what you're asking me to do, which sometimes used to be the case in the past, where you could be called out of the blue and then you didn't know what you were going to read. And then you come into the studio and something will be thrust into your face and say, hey, read this. No, I wasn't going to stand for that. So I said, okay, you want me to do something for you. Let us know the content of your asking me to do. And then we can talk about what it'll cost you. Agree, the cost, and then we can take it from there. Now, today, things have changed a little slightly. I don't have to be there present. I don't have to be in the studio to do all of this. In the past, you had to go to the studio for every little change that, that came up, the clients then you either back and call the client and you had to do these things. It cost you money, it cost you time, it cost you peace of mind. Many of those things have changed now. Now I record in the comfort of my own home. I do all the things that otherwise the studios would have been doing. I cut all of that out. So that becomes, value for me. It does not take anything away from the studios because they still do their work. Voiceover, voice acting is not the only thing they do. But they're still okay. But personally, my capacity has been enhanced by technology, and I'm able to do a whole lot of things that otherwise would have been done by the studios themselves, and which benefits would have been reaped by the studios, which I now, would have total control over. So briefly, this is where you're looking at, but technology's got a lot to do with that. And I have taken full advantage of technology. So if someone asks me to do something, I still go through the same process. What are you asking me to do? Then you have a structured value system, which is aligned to whatever it is that you're doing. It's a list of stuff. Okay, so if you want me to do a voiceover or an animation, if it's an animated voiceover, we'll see the length of the script and how much it will cost. We discuss that, we agree it, we sign an agreement, and then we move on. I go out and do the job. But the difference here is I don't go to a studio. I record from my own studio at home. I do the production myself, and I save you all the cost. And you can wake me up at 3 a.m. and I'll be available, to do the job. There you go.
Wow, nice. My next question, I'm still trying to decipher how best to ask it because it has a lot of tentacles. It's about structure. It's about the industry. It's about standards. A little while ago, you were talking about how in Nigeria, or you were just talking about how there's a need for there to be more of the structure that we expect in Ghana. And we could see that, so like you were saying, it'll have to do with some people coming together and stuff like that. I'm thinking about this because when we have a structure, people know that this is the average price or cost of doing voiceovers. This is what a voice talent is supposed to be paid for, say, 60 seconds commercial, or a TV commercial, or a radio commercial, or digital. Like, everything kind of has a definition. Unlike an unstructured industry where people just take whatever they feel they're worth, and at the end of the day, some people will be affected while some people will still stand out. So let's talk about this issue of structure. Where is Ghana at the moment in the voiceover industry as regards structure? If you could say this is the structure that is currently operating in Ghana as far as the voiceover industry is concerned, how would you describe the current state of the industry?
Well, a lot has changed. I mean, I've said this, that a lot has changed in 15 years, but not much has changed. Sadly, not much has changed. The very reason for which I took the bold step to do what I did still exists. So it's a bunch of disparate, individual or groupings doing their own thing here and there. And I know it's no different in Nigeria too. We have not been brave enough and courageous enough to come together, to put together an association to fight for our own rights. Matter of fact, I think the industry itself is its own worst enemy. We haven't figured it out yet, and that's just the grim truth. We haven't figured it out yet, and that is a big problem, and it's affecting the promotion of what I would call professionalism in the industry. Because obviously, people call me and say, wow, I hear your voice all the time. You must be making tons of money. I also want to be a voice artist. And then I'm a little amused in my head because they have absolutely no idea what's actually going on. It's a shark tank out there, with absolutely no scruples. You could very well, be bent over backwards and messed about with. There's a lot of non-structure in the system, and that's just the truth. Nothing is really working the way we would have wanted it. So personally, for someone like me, I would, and a few other people would be, the exception to the rule. Everybody else is operating like an amateur. You understand? And this is sad, and I have to make, reference to the way the Americans operate. What's the name of their association again? Do you recall?
There is SAG-AFTRA, there is NAVA, the latest one. I think there's another one I can't remember right now.
There's one that I actually wanted, but that's fine. They have these groupings, and these groupings actually influence how things are done, because there's an umbrella in which everybody is placed, and then they have structures put in place. So you cannot possibly infringe upon the rights, the creative rights, of these artists. We have not been able to do that here in Ghana. And I believe, except for South Africa, I don't know. We haven't done it, so this is a big problem that needs to be tackled. And as I said before, legislators are not the right people we couldn't lobby them, but if we're not able to put ourselves together, and form a persuasive, vocal group enough to make things happen, how do we even approach legislators, to put out our voice or our message across? So this is the sad reality of the industry. We're not there yet. We haven't begun even to get there yet. And the other time we're having a chance about AI, and you see how that adds a totally different, complexion to the problem. It's a huge challenge. So yes, we're not there yet, totally, unfortunately.
This is an interesting conversation, and I have a perspective to how a proper industry would work. In my own world, in my thoughts, I would say industries don't work just by the main players doing what they know how to do well. There has to be an ecosystem that carries that industry. So let me give an example. You just mentioned South Africa, and I must say, because I had a conversation with Themba Robin in the last season of the podcast, where he mentioned how in South Africa, even though there are not many institutions of learning voiceovers there, maybe just a few, but then the system where agents or agencies for voice actors exist, they kind of like put that structure there. So there's an amount that you're supposed to be paid, there's a contract, there's a way of monitoring how long someone's commercial has been used, and then, you know, all of that structure exists because the agency or the agencies are present. So what are the people running the agencies? Not necessarily voice actors, but perhaps business people, legal people. I mean, people in other industries whose value is, or whose craft or professionalism is needed to run some core parts of the voiceover industry. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, even though we have an association, it's safe for me to say that from what I've observed so far, the association was very, very strong some few decades back, and it's still very much present, don't get me wrong, but in recent times, the many changes and bold steps we've seen in Nigeria, in the Nigerian voiceover industry, has been anchored majorly by voiceover institutions of learning. You know, so you have these institutions here and there, and you know what that does to the industry? When people come in or people aspire to become voice actors, there's a system that they go through. So when they pass through an institution, they're able to learn not just the craft itself, but the business of it, and they understand what ought to be the standard of it. And so they carry on with that proper knowledge. And that way, the industry keeps having people who are schooled or educated about what ought to be the standard. So it's not even as perfect as we want it to be now, but I just had to explain a little bit of how I think, how I think an industry would work. It will work by having many stakeholders, you know, come together to make it work. So to a very large extent, I can understand, you know, when you talk about how it's important for you guys to come together and form maybe an association, right? I just wanted to add to that it's something I tell people in Nigeria. It's something I tell my colleagues and people associated with the voiceover industry. I say, if you're a voice actor and you're a writer, do something. Write about the voiceover industry. If you're a voice actor and you're a lawyer, use that legal skill, legal profession to work in the voiceover industry such that you are able to defend voice talents, you know, and protect them with your legal knowledge and skill. If you're an accountant, you can use that in the voiceover industry. That way, we have people who are not just voice actors, but they are skilled in other parts of other spheres of the business world and the professional world, and they come together, and it means progress for the voiceover industry. You want to say something about this?
Well, yes, I agree totally to you to a certain point. But, you know, again, I'm going to go back to the beginning. You know, I was making reference to the fact that it was an amateur's world. It still is an amateur's world here in Ghana. So it doesn't look, the financing aspect or the economics aspect does not look attractive for example, lawyers to get involved, you know, for, let's say, intellectual property situations or issues and so on and so forth. The legal profession may not be interested in what we're doing now because it's not giving up the right vibes as far as, you know, the money is concerned. You understand?
Yeah.
That is why, as far as I know, I think that we, the artists ourselves, should be the ones to start the conversation and protect our own rights.
I agree.
By setting up an association in order for us to draw the necessary attention to ourselves and to have the vocal capacity, to be able to attract those who are required, or those who are necessary, for our interests to be protected. But to just leave it like that at this stage, nobody's coming. You understand? We need to build a certain critical mass and value, how do you call it? A voice, a critical mass or voice mass, in order to attract the necessary help or the necessary attention to do the things that you're asking. It's not a chicken and egg thing. It's just one thing before the other. Well, at least this is the peculiar system here. And let me point out something, not to forget. You have to understand that the way it is right now as an amateurs market suits all the agencies pretty much. They love it this way because they're not called to make the necessary sacrifice to allow the system to grow. That is the cruel irony here. They're forgetting that once the system grows, it also lends or brings, a more positive and incrementally, progressively positive light, of value on what we're all doing. We're all in this together. But most people are short-sighted, so they're only looking at, cutting corners and saying, we're going to pay only this for this voice. It doesn't matter if it's the quality we're looking for. This is all we're going to pay for it, and that's it. We don't care. You understand what I'm saying? So it's not in the interest, it's not in the interest of the industry, the larger industry, which is the Advertisers Association of Ghana, or whoever's associated with them, or their how do you call it? Any other groupings associated with these big guns. It is not in their interest to have a strong union of artists and talents, because then that would require of them to do what is professionally required of them, to raise standards. So for them, this is a no-no. I can assure you of that. I know. I've been there. I know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's up to us to raise the awareness and to create the necessary conflict situation, in quotes, in order to generate the need and the required responses, and the required changes that we want in the industry. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yes.
I agree with you, absolutely. We need to take the charge. We need to do what we need to do. And then we attract the stakeholders that will come on board. And together we can build the industry that we desire. I want to ask a question, though, because if I am a Ghanaian, for instance, and I want to come into the voiceover industry, I know in Nigeria, if I was going to do that, I would probably go to one of these institutions of learning to learn about voiceovers, or I can just learn about it myself via things that I'm seeing online and all of that. Are there schools or institutions for learning voiceovers, or what's like the process in Ghana for someone who is in Ghana right now wanting to come into the voiceover industry? What's the practice like? But sometimes the practice is not the standard. So from what you've seen so far, how do people go about this, and how would you advise them to go about it?
Well, I really do not know about advice, but if you ask me, I've told you what I did to get here. Anybody who's serious about this craft and really wants to get into it can do it on their own. They don't need a school. But there are loads of schools around, media schools, who as part of their curriculum also have voice training and voice acting and so on and so forth, as part of the larger training spectrum of being a broadcaster or being a content generator or whatever you want to call it, and so on and so forth. So that's embedded in there somewhere. But I think that over and beyond these schools, anyone who has a passion like I did can do this for themselves. There's so much content, so much resource online for you to just just go and run with it. Anyone can do it. You have to understand what it is that you're looking for. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. You have to be clear about your vision. What do you want to do and how do you want to affect your space? And then you have to learn on a daily basis. You have to learn on a daily basis. So you don't necessarily, the schools are there, as I said, you can go to the schools and so on and so forth. But beyond that, everything comes right back to your doorstep. You are your best, your only cheerleader. You understand? You can do this yourself, and it's all up to you. It's all up to you.
All right, great. We've spoken for so long, and I think we need to come to the end of the podcast soon. So let me ask you this question. Where do you see the Ghanaian voiceover industry in the next 5 years?
Well, I'll tell you immediately that AI is going to force some things. Yes, a lot of amateurs are going to fall by the wayside because they'll not be needed anymore. Nobody's going to take you seriously if you're just a after fiber. You know what I mean when I say an after fiber? You come to the studio after 5 to record and leave. Nobody's going to take you seriously. You have to add value, serious value to yourself. You have to be both a businessman and an artist. You have to combine certain skills. You have to have different skill sets to be able to meet the market demand. And that's just the reality of it. So I cannot tell you what it's going to be like. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can assure you that a lot of people are going to fall by the wayside, and the industry is going to demand a certain level of acuity that will be difficult if you're not up to, up to date with technology. Let me also say this, and we've discussed this before. In order for you to stay afloat, again, I'm not going to talk about what the industry is going to look like in 5 years. Let's be realistic. What is it going to take for I to stay afloat in this industry? We have to take advantage of technology. It's available, it's online, it's everywhere. In most cases, you don't have to buy it. Take advantage of it and build yourself and scale yourself and leverage your capabilities. That's the only way you're going to make it in this industry. And as much as we have to consider the negatives, and protect ourselves against it and so on and so forth, we also have to keep in mind that technology is actually our friend. It was the same way 10 years ago. Technology has evolved. We have to evolve with it and take advantage of it and make it work for us whilst protecting ourselves against its ill effects. That's all I have to say on this. So you be your best cheerleader and you take care of yourself. That's all I have to say.
Wow. Great. I mean, I was even going to ask you if you have maybe one advice or one word for those that are aspiring, but I think you said it all. You may still have something to say. Before you see that, to add to the question that I asked you and to the answer you've given, do you think in 5 years' time there will be an association in Ghana for voice actors?
Well, I'd like to believe so. Looking at the way things are going now, we're going to need it, especially with AI and all of these newfangled technologies coming into play. People's interests are going to be so hurt, they will have to do something about it. So for me, it's actually a blessing in disguise. It's going to happen. I know I'm jumping into the fray. I know I am jumping into the fray. So something will happen in 5 years. When we talk again 5 years from now, I can assure you there will be an association of sorts taking care of the industry and taking care of our collective needs and requirements.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mawuli. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I am so thrilled having this conversation, learning where you started, how the journey has been, and where you are right now, knowing that you're not relenting. You keep getting better. For those who would love to reach out to you, work related anyway, how can they reach Mawuli, probably for a gig or something related?
Okay. I think totally, my handles. Maybe you'll have to put them out.
Definitely, I'll put them.
Yes, primarily you can contact me on my webpage at www.thevoiceprinter.com. There's also the voice printer. Well, each one of these words has an underscore. The voice printer machine, at the voice printer machine on how do you call it? IG, primarily.
Instagram. Yeah.
Yes, on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram.
Yes. So Tola, I'll leave you to do the rest for me.
Definitely, I'll be adding all of that in the show notes. So it's been a great time talking to you, Mawuli, and I can't wait for us to do this again. I'm also looking forward to talking to one or two Ghanaian voice actors too, so we get different perspective to what's going on in Ghana. I am so much interested in what's going on in Ghana, and I look forward to a growing industry and a better industry for voice talents as well. Is there anything you want to say before we leave, or we just call it a wrap?
Let's just say that whatever you put your mind to will happen. It's just a matter of time. It's up to you. I've proven that. I've done that. Anyone can. So please don't sleep on your dreams. Go get it. Go get it.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Mawuli. So that's a wrap on today's episode of the Everything Voiceovers podcast. I remain Tcode, your favorite voice actor from Nigeria, and I would see you next week, Friday, for another interesting episode. Till then, I'll say keep voicing and keep working to get better. Bye for now.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell someone about it. Follow the podcast on Everything VOs on all social media platforms. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. This podcast is a Coded Voiceovers production.